Sounded good, so we can get rolling. Yeah, welcome to our Sunday morning live stream. We do this every single Sunday at 8:45 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we also have this on a podcast. So if you're tuning in on the podcast, welcome to our podcast. We publish this weekly based on our YouTube live streams that we do. The layout is usually we start out with some Genus and or beer news. That's different things that are going on in the shop / brewery, or just different things that are going on in the beer industry as a whole. Then we usually go on to a beer of the week, where we talk about a specific style. We break down our favorite malts, hops, and yeasts to use for that style. And then we go to one or two discussion topics, and then we usually open up to a question and answer segment. So you guys can give us your questions, and we'll answer them for you. Normally this is a two-man show, but Logan is out of town, and I haven't heard from Tim yet, so let's see if he answered and whether or not he's going to show up. Still no answer. All right, we'll see. Let's go ahead and get on to our Genus news. So first off, we started a most expensive game of beer pong ever segment. We published a small video on our TikTok, and it might end up going on Instagram as well. But basically, we're going to try to make the most expensive game of beer pong. That's going to be starting with buying the most expensive beers possible. So if any of you out there know where you can find some expensive beers and want to buy them for us and send them to us, we can pay you back. If you know of some Utopias or Cantillon or anything that's happening in a bottle shop near you, send us a message on Facebook or on YouTube or something like that, and just say, hey, do you want me to buy this for you? And then hopefully we'll be like, yeah, we can totally do that. Send it to us, and then we'll pay you back. News number 2, Logan finally beat the Oregon Trail, but now he's working on a Tetris personal best, and so he's not going to be here until at least Tuesday. We got kegerators back in stock. We picked up the Comos V2 kegerators. That's the one that you can get from morebeer.com. So we did a how to build those, how to assemble those video. Kind of fun. They have the inner tap forward sealing faucets. They're a great kegerator for the price, and so I think there's a really good quality kegerator for an inexpensive price that I totally recommend. We've got we talked about last week how we got a Cannular Pro in stock, but apparently there is a huge issue with the power supply, at least for the American outlets. Hey, Tim Super forgot, but he's going to be here in 20-ish minutes. Okay, so we'll have Tim eventually. That's perfect. We'll have him for some segments. Nice. But yeah, there's a huge issue in America with the power supply for the Cannular Pro not working. I called them on that, and they said that they can send us a power supply to the regular Cannular, which should work for seaming pretty much everything except for, what is it, not the aluminum cans? Aluminum cans? The tin cans, the one that you would can peas or whatever in. They said the regular Cannular power supply should work for everything except for that. So hopefully we get our Pro. You can see it kind of behind me. Hopefully we get that up and running. And then the things that we tapped this last week, we tapped a barrel-aged Saison, which is tasting phenomenal. Super excited about that. And we also had a quad that released 3 months ago, but we actually took 2 quarter barrels and aged those on Brett. And so the ones that we aged on Brett, we're finally getting around to tapping. Those are tasting really good too, so excited to have those on. And that's all I have for this week's Genus news, which means it's time for our Beer of the Week. Bum, 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 Beer of the Week. Yeah. And this is going to be Irish Extra Stout, category 15C. Irish Extra Stout is kind of a fun one because you can get it in different variations regionally depending on where you are. Of course, the most common one is the Genus Export Stout or Genus Extra Stout. And basically what it is it takes a lot of the same flavor profiles from an Irish style dry stout, and it amplifies them in terms of just being an overall bigger beer, but it also gives you some room to build out a little bit of a middle to it, which is why it's a beer style that I like. Give you some technical specs here. The Irish Extra Stout can be anywhere from 25 to 45 IBUs, have an original gravity of 35 to 50 IBUs, have an original gravity of 1052 to 1062, and an alcohol percentage anywhere between 5.5 and 6.5%. The SRM on the Irish Extra Stout can be anywhere from 25 to 40. So 40 is kind of like where you can't really tell a difference. Anything darker than 40 is just 40 plus. So that's all kind of the same. And 25, that's still pretty dark. So 25 is where a lot of portals will land. It's very black, but you might be able to see a little bit of amber or garnet hue in the middle of it. I might sneeze, so I'll try to look away if that happens. The malt of the week is a really great one for filling out that middle section. Like I said, I like to be able to build a little bit of a middle compared to the Irish Dry Stout, where it's really two-note. It's like a beer with roast character, that straight up coffee burnt kind of taste. But with an Irish Extra Stout, you have a little extra room with the malts being a little bit more. And so our malt of the week is going to be aromatic. The aromatic that we carry is from Franco-Belges, and it actually is a really light aromatic coming in between 4 and 6 SRM or Lovibond. And the reason I like it is because it it plays a really good background player as a malt, and so it doesn't necessarily scream like, hey, I threw a lot of this malt in there, but it does have a very pronounced kind of toasted biscuit note to it. So it's really good at building out that middle without necessarily screaming that it's there. And so it's a really great way to, if you have a relatively two-note beer that you just want to add that subtle complexity to, use some aromatic malts in there. And the one that I recommend is the Franco-Belges, like I said, because it is lighter. A lot of aromatic malts will come in that 20 to 25 Lovibond range. Someone's saying I've drank a fair share of glycol so far this morning. That's right, I got to keep things chilly and slippery. Our hop of the week, I chose Target. Target's just one of those standard English style bittering / pseudo dual purpose hops. It's got a nice earthy, grassy tone to it, but in a beer like this, it's going to be playing a background role. So really you can substitute anything as long as you're ending up in that same overall bitterness. You can use, Columbus as a 60-minute edition and that be your only hop. The world is your oyster. But if you want to do a double edition and get a little bit of that earthy flavor, I think Target's a great English style hop to go with. That said, it's not the most important hop out there. Yeah, hit that like button, folks. I agree. The yeast of the week is, of course, Irish ale yeast. Irish ale yeast is surprisingly a cleaner yeast than you might expect, but it does have some funkiness to it. It's designed to build on the earthiness of an Irish stout and also add complexity to a relatively two-note beer. What I mean by that is, let's say you were fermenting the same style with Chico, the American ale strain. This beer would just taste like bright, toasted, burnt stuff. Using the Irish ale, you get a little bit of that funkiness to kind of give depth to character, and it will really play well with that aromatic malt. And so you'll have a little bit of depth to the whole, to the beer in and of itself. So Irish ale can be fermented on the cold end somewhere around that low 60s, and on the warm end all the way up to 70, I think maybe even 72. But once you get above 70, it really starts to get extra fruity, and it's not exactly what you're looking for. So I recommend fermenting this around 68 degrees, where you get just a little bit of the fruitiness from the yeast, but not enough that it's going to be overpowering the beer style. All in all, this is a pretty refreshing and basic beer style compared to like an American style stout or even a robust porter, where for dark beers, those are more of a mouthfeel. Those are more something that you want to chew on. This should be a relatively sessionable, easy drinking beer, but with some complexity that you're looking for to make it actually worth actually tasting. So it's not like a crushable Coors Light or something like that, but it's definitely meant to be a slightly bigger version of a sessionable beer. Water profile on a lot of these Irish style dark beers is going to be a little bit minerally, a little bit more alkaline, and a big part of that is having to do with the fact that the dark malts actually add acidity to the mash. And so to get an appropriate mash conversion, having a more alkaline base water, so adding something like bicarbonate, bicarbonate's the biggest one to get the alkalinity, but also adding your calciums and your sulfates and everything to that too. Anything typical of a more minerally profile is going to work really well with the Irish style stout. Fun fact about how most historical styles developed, like regional specific styles, they usually developed backwards from the water profile. And so the reason, or a big reason why a lot of light beers came from certain regions in Germany is because the minerals lended well to making that style of beer taste good. Same thing with the UK and Ireland. A lot of the beers that came out of those were darker and heavier beers because the minerals that were in those waters lended well to making those beers taste good. So a little bit more of a minerally profile is going to go with the Irish Extra Stout. Let's answer a couple questions before we move on to our topic number 1. Hey, someone's glad to see that this video popping up because he's brewing in New England with Azaka and Raquel hops tomorrow. Nice. Got a lot of people tuning in from all around the world. Hello, everybody. What became of the barley wine we did a torture test on the Anvil Foundry with? We tapped that barley wine, and it went way too fast for us to do a review on. That wasn't my bad. It tasted really good, though. All right, we fixed the echo issue. Where are we at? When it comes to stouts, Anthony almost always uses Imperial Darkness, so that's the same thing as the Irish ale yeast. It's just a phenomenal workhorse with a subtle complexity to it. I love that yeast. Would pushing that yeast give a fruitiness to a tropical stout? So no, pushing the Irish style ale yeast, if you ferment it on the warm side, actually starts to give you more of an English style fruitiness, and then it also gives you a little bit of fusels, so it ends up being kind of a hot beer, and you don't want that fusely heat because you shouldn't want any distracting flavors, even in a tropical stout. So for tropical stout, more so than usual. People are saying I'm quiet. Just me? Okay. I can turn the volume up a little bit. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to echo myself. But real quick, tropical stouts, you definitely just want to take something like the Cal Lager strain and ferment it a little bit warm. Let me take a small break so that I can turn that volume up and make sure that I'm sounding good to everybody. If I come back and everything's like distorted and peaking, let me know. All right, hopefully that wasn't too big of an adjustment. Let me know if that sound is sounding better. I can also get closer to the mic if need be. When fermenting under pressure, can I ferment at a slightly higher temperature? Sort of, but it's not always a good idea, and that's a very yeast-dependent question. So some yeast can handle that really, really well, and some yeast perform terribly. So in general, even fermenting under pressure, I would try to ferment in the same temperature range that you would with the yeast otherwise. Exceptions are going to be things like quake, obviously, where those just ferment warmer anyway. And then there's a couple of yeasts that perform really well at higher temperatures. But you want to look for a robust yeast when you're doing something like that. Beersmith and Brewfather do the same thing in terms of beer design, but Brewfather is sexier looking and has added toys. Oh, that's cool. I haven't used the Brewfather. How do you do water profile additions when the local water treatment keeps changing? That's a great question. I take an average basically, so I try to lean towards the middle, and then we'll do regular water samples just to see how ours is changing. But yeah, I try to go within a range. I don't specifically try to hit an exact water every single time. Making a tincture of vanilla bean and cocoa nibs soaked in rum. How much rum do you recommend? Do I strain out the solids and add the liquid only, or dump it all in when kegging? With cocoa nibs and vanilla beans, you can dump all that in. It'd probably do better in a muslin bag or something that would strain those out and make sure that they don't get caught in the dip tube, because those cocoa nibs will plug your dip tube and they'll make it so that your keg can't pour anymore. But yeah, you can dump the whole thing in. In terms of how much rum, it really depends on the flavor of the rum. If it's Bacardi has like a sickly sweet rum kind of quality, and so I wouldn't recommend adding too much. But if it was something like a nice barrel-aged rum, you could probably go with, I don't know, half a fifth. Ferment warm. Or the Weiss 2363. Oh, so yeah, for people are talking about tropical stout still. 2633, which is the Oktoberfest blend fermented warm, is a perfect one. All right, well, table questions for a little bit, and then we'll go into our topic number 1. And then if you got more questions that you want to add on, I'll make sure to get to those after topic number 1, which is, what flavors do you want and what flavors do you not want in a juicy or hazy style IPA? And this is a question that came up because I get a lot of people that, first of all, want or think they want to try to get as much yeast to remain in their beer for a hazy style IPA. They think that the haze comes from your yeast in suspension, which can be somewhat true, but that should be the last place that the most of the haze comes from. And the reason this is an issue is because there are some off flavors that can come from having too much yeast in suspension. So let's talk about what you want from your yeast. The first thing that you want from your yeast in a hazy or juicy New England style IPA is you want it to push forward some subtle fruitiness. You want it to give you some flavors that complement all the hops that you're throwing in there without necessarily distracting or being overbearing. So subtle fruitiness is a really good quality to have, and then also a yeast that's slightly malt leaning. The reason you want something slightly malt leaning is a little bit of extra sweetness, or the perception of sweetness, is actually going to help push forward those hops as well. So you want that juiciness to taste like juiciness. You think of juice has sugar in it, and so you definitely want your beer to kind of emulate that. You don't want a yeast that's too bright. If your yeast is bright and tinny, it can be a distraction. It can be kind of a secondary note that makes you not think of the nice fruity flavors that you're getting off your hops. And the thing that you really don't want is yeast bite. Yeast bite is basically the flavor of all the aminos that come from the yeast themselves, and that flavor it's distracting, and it tastes like when you have too much burnt flavor on a piece of toast or something like that, or it tastes like what's a good term, like chewing on wood a little bit. So yeast bite is a very distracting note to have in beer, and it's definitely something that you don't want, which is why I don't want people thinking that they need to get a lot of yeast left in suspension. Of course, some yeast in suspension is fine, but a lot of the haze that's going to come from a hazy or a juicy or a New England style IPA should come from, first of all, the extra proteins that you have from your malts. So that's going to be when you use a lot of oats, a lot of flaked wheat, a lot of unmalted stuff. Anything that's high adjunct is going to give you those proteins that are going to taste really good and give you that extra haze that complements the hop juice. And then another part of what's going to give you that haze is actually the fact that you're having so much hops in this beer that amount of hop oil actually gives you that kind of murky look. So with a lot of hops, especially with a Whirlpool edition and a dry hop, you'll get an oily look to your beer, which is what makes it look not clear. It looks juicy, it looks hazy. And the last thing you should be wanting is a lot of yeast in suspension to ruin that beautiful look. So that's what you get from yeast. Let's talk about what you want from hops in a New England style IPA. Of course, everyone knows that you want a lot of big, juicy notes that come off your hops. I think the best place to get these is with a Whirlpool edition. Whirlpool is going to be after you kill your heat from the boil and you started to chill down your beer. There's a couple different spots that you'll get really great flavors. And the first is going to be that boiling temperature all the way down to about 180 degrees, especially in that 190 to 180 degree range. A lot of the hops will start to give you tropical fruit notes. They'll give you some peachy notes. They'll give you some extra juicy fruity notes. And then when you get down to that 160 to 140 degree range, an extra hop addition here might boost some citrus tones too. Of course, depending on what hops you're throwing out there. But that has to do with the rate of solubility of the hop oils that are giving you those flavors, and it also has to do with the rate of evaporation of those hop oils. So that's why a two-stage hop addition in the Whirlpool can actually give you a more dynamic range of flavors. If you don't necessarily have the capacity or want to do a two-stage, I think the best thing to do is just add a lot of hops right after flame out and try to get your beer down to that 180 degree range pretty quickly, and then let it sit at that 180 degree range for 15 to 20 minutes before chilling it the rest of the way down. And if you can add more hops at that point too. In terms of how much hops you should be adding, my minimum for a Whirlpool edition and a juicy or New England style IPA is going to be 4 ounces of pellets or 2 ounces of cryos, and they should be the freshest and most flavorful hops that you can find. So when you go into your local homebrew supply store, if you've got a recipe, don't necessarily think you need to stick to the recipe. I would ask your local homebrew supply store what year their hops are from, and make sure that that matches in your recipe. If they happen to have an older hop and they let you know that, I would personally suggest just going with a newer crop year, no matter what the hop is. Of course, you can also look at things like the total oil of different kinds of hops. So total oil is going to be how much flavoring compounds basically you can get off that hops. And so there's hops like Galaxy and Citra that have high total oils, and those are easy ones to get big flavors off of. If your hop is low total oils, relatively speaking, that's going to be like milligrams per liter or something like that is the measurement. But usually less than 2 is relatively low compared to a lot of these bigger, fruitier hops. Then I would recommend adding more. So like I said, 4 ounces of pellets or 2 ounces of cryo lupulin hops is going to be my minimum to add at Whirlpool. And you can go all the way up to, I would say, in that 8 to 10 ounces, especially if you're doing a 2-stage Whirlpool. Like you can get a lot of hops in there. So hopefully that answers that. Notes of flavors that you're going to want. Obviously, tropical fruits, citrus, stone fruit is a really good medium character to kind of add that juicy component. And then I even threw something like coconut in there. Coconuts from Sabro is a really unique kind of flavoring component that I think helps build a dynamic range when it comes to the hops. So, I don't know, play around with it. Figure out what you like. Flavors that you don't want from hops. You don't want a lot of bitterness. So overall, a juicy or New England IPA should be a relatively low bittered beer. I personally don't add any hops during the boil. Sometimes I'll add one like right at flame out, depending on where I want my IBUs to land or how I'm going to do my Whirlpool additions. But you're only aiming for that like 30 to 35 IBU range total, and you will get a lot of that from the massive amounts of hops you're adding during the Whirlpool. So don't really focus on anything don't focus on like a 60-minute edition and then a 15-minute edition. Anything that you would do in a standard West Coast IPA just doesn't make a lot of sense to do in a juicy or New England style IPA. So worry about that a lot less and how you get those big fruity flavors in your Whirlpool. Another thing that you don't want is hop bite or plant matter flavor. So you don't want that grassiness that adds extra bitterness to your beer. The reason being, same thing with yeast bite, same thing with too much bitterness. It's a distracting flavor from all those big fruity flavors that you want in a New England or hazy, juicy style IPA. So you don't want that. How you avoid the hop bite or plant matter flavor? First and foremost, there should be some sort of filtration mechanism going from your Whirlpool or your hop stand, your hop back, whatever you want to call it, into your fermenter. So get those hops out of there. On the commercial scale, that actually comes from the Whirlpool. The Whirlpool will cone up all the hops, and then there's usually some sort of a trub dam that before the exit port on the kettle. So it keeps all the hops behind that trub dam. On the homebrew scale, the easiest way to do it is probably just to run it through a mesh filter or even a mesh bag, something like that, to get those hops out of there. But you don't want your yeast fermenting on all that plant matter in your primary fermentation. Another thing you need to avoid is extra long dry hopping times. So speaking of dry hopping, what you're aiming for in a New England or juicy style IPA is going to be biotransformation dry hop. So what I like to tell people is you wait until your yeast hits high krausen. So that's the maximum amount of violent action that's going on in your fermenter. So you see all those bubbles coming up, you see the foam head, it's at high krausen. As soon as that starts to collapse, when it starts to fall back down, that's when you open up your fermenter and quickly throw in your dry hops. And then that's when you set a timer for 3 to 4 days before you get that beer into package. If your beer is not completely done in that 3 to 4 days, that's completely fine. If you're going into kegs, you just low dissolved oxygen transfer into kegs and let it finish out in the kegs. Of course, make sure that your kegs are purged with CO2. You don't want oxygen getting anywhere near your beer at this point. And then if you are going into bottles, same kind of thing, just back off. Take a gravity sample, and if your beer is not completely done, just back off the amount of priming sugar to make up for that. Someone's asking, what dry yeast do I recommend for juicy IPAs? The easiest one is SO4. SO4 makes fantastic juicy IPAs, super simple to use, and it's that standard English flavor. So basically any English style yeast works pretty well for a juicy IPA. We've even used like Tartan, the Scottish strain, that works pretty well. anything that's going to pump up that juiciness a little bit. Quite high krausen add after like 24 hours. Yep. We do that with our low-cal IPA. So that's talking about quake, which is a really fast fermenting yeast. Obviously, that yeast can finish out a beer in a matter of days, especially when you're fermenting it close to that 100-degree mark. So when we do our low-cal IPA, what we do is we brew the beer one day. The very next day, it's almost all the way done. We add our dry hop, and we add enzymes at the same time. And it finishes out like 1 or 2 days later. And then it goes into kegs. All right, let's talk about malts. So malts in a New England style IPA and a juicy and a hazy, malts are meant to build textures to support all those juicy flavors. One of the reasons that oats is such a commonly used malt in New England or hazy or juicy IPAs is because oats, in addition to having the extra bodybuilding proteins, things that make your beer fluffy and big, oats also have a little bit of oily slickness to them. So they complement the same kind of hop oil juiciness by giving you a texture that supports all the flavors. So a little bit of that oily slickness is good. Also, or again, like the things that fluff up your beer, the things that give you extra head and extra body, like flaked wheat, those go great too. But I always like to add some combination of malted oats and or flaked oats just to make sure that oil content is there. A little bit of biscuitiness is also okay. So I'll see some people using like a small amount of melanoidin or aromatic or a medium amount of like Munich malt in there. And that's totally fine, but you just gotta make sure that you're not getting to the point where it's too distracting if you're adding too much. And of course you want to avoid big malt flavors. So any of those big malt flavors are gonna be like lots of crystal malts, any dark crystal malts obviously, Special B, Special X, although there's probably a way to make that work, maybe. Obviously any roast malts don't belong in there. And the one mistake that I see most people making more often than not is just too much of those biscuity flavors. And so if you're adding like a pound of Victory for your 5-gallon batch, that's way too much. And that's gonna be a distracting flavor that takes away from the juiciness. And that's pretty much all I have for what flavors do you or do you not want in a juicy/hazy IPA. Let's roll through and see if I can find some questions to Q&A. Let's see, back where... All right. Sound better. Someone brewed a Quake smoked lager using Rausch malt. It came out like hot dog water. Oh yeah. Ugh. Know your smoked malts. We carry 8 different kinds of smoked malts, and they have a very, very wide range of flavors. So yeah, it's kind of hard to say exactly why, but I know a lot of let's see, we use Best Malts Rausch malt. A lot of Rausch malts, and even the smoked malts from Breeze, they have a little bit of that meaty kind of quality to them. So that extra meat component is something that you definitely don't really want. Hey, Tim's here. You want to grab some beer and taste it in front of people?
Sure.
I was thinking we can just finally do that one beer that guy sent us a long time ago that we haven't tasted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which one is that one beer?
The one that had the note that he sent us. You know what I'm talking about? All the cans?
All the cans, yeah.
All the cans.
All the cans.
And then you can find the note, you can read the note and be like, hey, sorry that we got this a long time ago and forgot to taste it yet. But we're excited to. All right. Someone's brewing an Irish Extra Stout today. Oh, nice. Challenger and EKG fermenting with Stallion Quake. It's not a yeast that I've used. Oh, that's interesting though. Challenger and EKG, of course, are in the same wheelhouse as Target. Well, Challenger is classic, earthy, grassy, Englishy flavors, and then EKG just pumps that up, obviously. Someone brewed a pale ale with Quake. Recently tried it a couple days ago. So much sediment. Not a question, just an observation. Oh. Bottle conditioned. Yeah, if you're brewing with Quake, a lot of times they take a while to crash out, even if they're done. So if you're bottle conditioning it, I can see that being, a lot of sediment. But when they do crash out, they can crash out pretty bright. We've definitely gotten some really crisp, clear ones. What's my take on rehydrating dry yeast? Okay or not? My take is if you're doing anything less than 6.5% alcohol, if it's going to be a light beer, if it's not super hoppy, don't rehydrate. That's an extra step that you don't need. Just pitch it directly. If you're doing a big beer, first of all, I always recommend a starter, but in lieu of a starter, definitely at least rehydrate it. And we also like to rehydrate with, there's a yeast rehydrating nutrient called GoFirm. So taking good care of your yeast. The vast majority of simple beers, no big deal.
They're all different.
Okay, all right, yeah. Load it up, make my wife happy that we're drinking. Do hop spiders / filters lower hop utilization? Been following recipes on Brewer's Friend for IPAs, but it seemed like IBUs was always way below the calculation. Yes. What we'll do when we want to strain out our hops, instead of using like a hop spider, hop spiders can work for a medium amount of hops, especially if you've got a lot of flow around the hop spider. But for anything that's super hoppy, when we want to strain those out, on the small scale, we might strain it out afterwards by just running our beer through a filter, or like like a mesh strainer. But on a big scale, what we'll do is we'll take a mesh bag that's oversized, so it's almost as big as our entire kettle, and we'll throw our hops in there and give it plenty of room to actually roll around in the boil. But yeah, they can lower your utilization. What's your process for using super clear? The Kiesel sol step, the stage 1, we usually use, well kind of depending. Sometimes we'll use that just at the end of fermentation before we go into the bright, or sometimes if we get it into the bright first, we'll use it right when it goes into the bright. But then the Kaidasan step, we always add when it's chilled and crashed. And it's usually about 2 days in between each. All right, well, we'll get to some more questions in just a little bit. But Steve Founders actually sent us a handful of beers a while ago, and we meant to taste them like that week, and then totally got flustered with a bunch of COVID stuff happening, shutdowns and all sorts of things. So we didn't get around to it, and we felt really bad. But now that we've got Tim and meself, yeah, that's a real thing, here, we could taste them. And he did send us a note that says, hey guys, here's a few beers from my homebrew taps that we've brewed to drink during quarantine. Hope you enjoy. And hashtag rate my beer. Thanks for all your content on YouTube. Steve Founders. And then what's that say? Tom Signat. That's just a name that I can't
Pronounce.
Yeah. So Steve and Tom, thank you so much for sending these. I apologize for not getting to them sooner. The packaging is beautiful, by the way. Home brewing. TBD home brewing. Oh, I don't know how you did that. Did you print those labels? I don't know if you're out there right now, but if you did and you printed those labels, that's awesome. Good job.
They look pretty nice.
Yeah. Let me pull up the questions on this computer real quick.
Okay.
Now we can both see questions.
Yay!
The last one that I did, high proof alcohol, pull mostly flavor out there. Oh wow, I've just skipped. We're somewhere around there. That and lower. The Kwai Kai Krause and after 24 hours, I already did that one. West Coast IPA and lower.
West Coast IPA. What dry yeast do you recommend for West Coast IPA? On your classic one on there is going to be USO5 or any Chico strain. Honestly, what we found it works really well too is SO4. SO4 can be neutral enough, but add just a little bit of fruitiness to really enhance those hops. And it's a lot more forgiving than USO5 is. USO5 isn't quite as set it and forget it as most people think it is, and SO4 pretty much is.
SO4 is a workhorse.
It's a beautiful yeast.
Weiser says you don't look awake.
Yeah, well, you know, Peter woke me up, so that's all right. I totally remembered that I had to be here for sure, 100%.
All right, what's the best beer to start with?
There is a peaches and cream ale. There's a Scottish ale, IPA,
That's a
coconut porter, and there's one more that I kind of forgot.
Ooh, let's start with the peaches and cream ale.
Yeah,
that's gonna be one that sat really well too. So hopefully this is
wonderful.
Peaches and cream ale.
I totally just. Oh, there we are. There it is. Where's the guy with all the hair? Logan. That's Logan. He is gone in Oregon right now.
Oh, I told him that he was trying to set a new PB at Tetris.
Oh, he would know better. That's probably what he's doing. Totally, 100%.
Last week I told him he was trying to speed run the Oregon Trail.
I think that might have actually been true. I'm pretty sure.
I mean, he kind of did. Speed run, I don't know, 80, 90 miles an hour. How fast do you go down when you go down there on that highway?
On that highway, as fast as you can.
It's true.
Literally.
There's nobody there.
There's no speed limit. Like the flavor of malt, but dislike the grapefruit flavor. Roy Hall. I think I'm missing something on that. So I'm gonna skip that. Peter probably saw it.
We'll see. I had this pulled up and then it just it kicked me off, and so I had to pull it up again.
Would rye be a negative contribution for a hazy? No. I would honestly say no. Rye could be very interesting in a hazy. Not going to quite be as full as, say, oats or wheat on that. But I tend to love rye myself, and as long as you don't overdo it, you're still going to get a little bit of good puffiness, especially from flaked rye and some nice spiciness.
This is really good.
Ooh. It smells literally like peaches and cream.
There's no obtrusive flavor. You get, I wonder what vanilla you used. That's a nice vanilla. It tastes a little bit like bourbony, a little bit, you get it blends in with alcohol really well without being obtrusive. And then the peaches is just a nice.
Right. It's not overly fruited.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to say I really love about this right now. Not overly fruited, just a nice little easy drink. That's awesomely
tasty.
Delicious.
On the rye, the only thing that I would say is don't go overboard with it. So you wouldn't want to go, you can go 40% between oat malt and flaked oats. You wouldn't want to go 40% between rye malt and flaked rye. So I'd probably keep the rye in that 20% or under range, and then build up the rest of your adjunct with some more flaked wheat or something like that. Or some malted wheat.
Yeah. If you're really good, you can go half rye and flaked rye, but I don't suggest it because it makes people mad.
Yeah. That was me.
That was him. We had a miscommunication. It's delicious, but it was an accident. Don't do it.
Yeah.
20% or lower, definitely. Don't be that guy that makes other people hate rye beers because you made a bad rye beer. Make a delicious rye beer and convert more people.
That's right. A nice ambery rye lager, maybe coming soon.
Ooh, yes.
Be a good fall one.
Yeah.
Single mash or multi-step mash for a hazy. I think a single mash is totally fine. You don't need to get too crazy. We do staged matches or step matches a lot for a lot of our lighter beers, especially when we make them on the big scale downtown. Just checks more boxes for us, but for a hazy style IPA, no reason to.
Yeah. There's reasons for both. Kind of look at what you're doing and then decide from there.
When making starters, how do I know I'm under pitching? Belgian style. Did a starter and had 50 mils of solids in the bottom of a canning jar.
Hi, Lisa.
I don't know how to know if you're under pitching without actually using a hemocytometer. So a hemocytometer is a little grid that you can put under a microscope and see, I have this many viable cells. Dye it with a little methylene blue. But in terms of underpitching, I never try to underpitch. I always err on the side of overpitching. So even with Belgian-style beers, I want a nice, big, healthy pitch. And then if I want some extra fruity Belgian-ness, I just kick up that temperature during fermentation. Or I might play around with the acidity going in. But I would never try to underpitch.
Unless you're using quake and then severely underpitch. But for most yeast, don't do it. For Belgian yeast, like Peter said, if you want to push those nice, spicy esters, phenolics, all the good num-nums coming out of there, ferment it warm. That's what Belgian yeast loves to do. I think French Saison, most of the recommended fermentation on that is 90 degrees.
Yeah.
Which is weird. It seems really weird to do that when you've been taught to keep it so low. But for Belgians and things like that, that's what they give when they ferment hot. Those are wonderful, wonderful yeasts.
Keep it so low.
Yeah.
I just read one. Oh, is there a beer style that you don't like but have to sell? How do you brew a beer style you don't like? That's a good question.
Well, I'm going to say first, make it good and make it something you would drink. Yeah. If you make something, even if you don't particularly like that style, but you can appreciate and drink it, it's probably going to be a wonderful beer. I personally take it as a challenge to be like, man, I don't really like this, but other people do. So let's make this the best thing that I can. That way, I'm still awesome.
Yeah, what we find, I think, both of us and styles that we have here is that styles that we don't like, but we're brewing, end up being more neutral or more like towards the middle, whereas styles that we do like, i.e. sours, we kind of go super aggro on, so we'll make some like really, really aggressive sours, and then a lot of other people won't like them. But airing towards the middle and airing towards like more of a neutral flavor profile within the style, I think is a kind of a good compromise.
I would also say in that adding something in there that you think is fun, or maybe a new brewing technique or malt to add some interest to it. I will say that we generally don't prefer the cream ales. Wonderful, delicious style of beer, but the blonde, the cream, kind of everything right around in that realm gets a little bit muddled and isn't quite as exciting. But having said that, seeing where we can figure out how to make it exciting in our blonde ale using actually other hops that you wouldn't normally use. I think our last blonde ale got a whole bunch of like tropical hops in it going in there. But keeping that low so you're not getting, a hoppy blonde, but still getting a classic style on there. Just something different and interesting going on at the same time.
Make it fun for you.
Yeah.
Or a new malt. There's always, I buy crazy amounts of new malts. So try a different base malt. Make it an experiment.
Yeah, make it something you'll get useful out of that. And it makes it definitely a lot more interesting for it. And, I honestly think that our personal customers, and we've built this customer base to appreciate different beers, but our customers do prefer that when they come in, it's not always exactly the same thing over and over. There's little bits of different stuff they can get excited about.
Variety is the spice of life. How do I get lower? Why do I get lower efficiency with wheat malt than with barley? I just made an American wheat beer yesterday with Cascade and Sigmund Genus. Haven't used that hop. Wheat malt actually has lower extract potential, and so I don't know if your software calculated the difference in extract potential, but wheat malt will generally be about 4 points less extract potential than most barley-based malts. That said, if that's not why, it can also be because of the higher beta-glucans and yeast. What that means is yeast will have beta-glucans in them which form gummy layers in your mash, and so when you're sparging or rinsing out your mash water, those beta-glucans will channel the sparge water in different ways through your mash, so you're not pulling all of the sugars that you can get off your mash. And we combat that with enzymes more often than not.
Yeah. It started using an enzyme called Visco Buster from White Labs, and that thing is beautiful. It drains out the mash extremely well. And I will say on that, for our high adjunct brews, we've seen a noticeable increase just in the mash itself, not having that top gummy layer on there, as well as efficiency coming out of it.
Yeah. If you don't have access to that enzyme, the best way to do it is just do a step mash. So do a beta-glucanase rest at about 120 degrees. That's going to combo beta-glucanase and protein rest. And you can go all the way up to 130 for both of those. But the lower end will also give you a little bit of extra acidity.
Yeah. I lost everything.
What style to brew with smoked malts before using them? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Get your hands on the Lutra yet? Yes, we have a beer fermenting with Lutra right now.
Right now. It's going to be delicious. We actually made that into being a light adjunct lager. Not necessarily adjunct, actually. It was 100% barley. But just being a light lager to see how much we could push this to be clean fermented. I think we fermented right about 91, 92 degrees. This has been really fun. While it was fermenting, there were some interesting flavors being thrown off, but now that it's cooled down and crashed, I think we're going to succeed in making a pseudo lager at 90 degrees in like a week. It's a good yeast, definitely. Doug, using a hop bag, anyone try pushing beer through the trapped hops using a pump during whirlpool? Yeah, we've done that before. Sometimes when we do the whirlpool, most of the time when we do the whirlpool in our kettle, it has a port on the side that spins it. And I try to put our hop bag actually in front of that port so it always hits the rotating water. We've definitely done it on the inside before too. The only issue I would say with that is that as part particulates start getting caught by that hop bag, it could plug up the hop bag and then push it straight up out of the top.
People commenting on my microphone. Is mine too quiet, or was Tim's too loud? Let me know.
Oh,
I got a lot of
I'm much
microphones.
louder. I read that as be much
All of a
louder.
sudden, people say that they can't hear me at all.
Weird. Yeah, so when you're doing that, it definitely will up your utilization because you're moving that beer along the hops and getting it out of that trap thing. Just be aware that if it starts to plug up, well, maybe with some proteins in the whirlpool and stuff like that, it could climb out. So watch it. Just, be aware of it. Ella hops. Ooh.
Was that a recent thing? Did that just happen, or is that how quiet I've been the entire time? I only just got to the mic comments. Yeah, sorry, we're scrolling. All right, that should be better. I don't know what happened, but it looks like the pad got hit or something. Anyways, hopefully we're sounding good right now. Let me know. And then
so Ella hops are wonderful in NEIPA's, John Grisham, but I just saw William Fletcher's. Can hop oils and NEIPA's
so
mess
much
up
better
refractometer readings? Yes. Well, I don't know exactly if the oils are worth doing.
Too loud. All right, now I'm too loud.
Refractometers are not actually a very good thing to use post-boil. They are wonderful to use pre-boil, but post-boil, not quite as much. In post-boil, because there's so much particulates floating around, especially hop particles that are in there, especially if you're using pellets, that a lot of the time the refractometer readings are not going to be as accurate as they should be. So at that point, for us, I use a refractometer all the way up until we hit the boil, and then after the boil, it's always going to be a hydrometer for what we do in here, just because of that. Now, if you're nervous about it, or if you only have a refractometer, that's 100% okay. Just take several readings and see what's consistent in there, rather than trusting one reading to be right.
Hard seltzer is just sugar, no grains. That's mostly correct. Just start ASMR live stream beer tasting.
There we go. I just caught up to where you were.
Hopefully that was ASMR enough.
Right. Is there really much of a difference between using dry yeast and liquid yeast in IPA if you ferment at recommended temperature? There can be. I will answer it that way. There can be. Since dried yeast is dried, it goes through that drying process. I'm throwing dried out there a lot. I feel like it. It goes through that drying process, which actually can lower the viability of that yeast. The liquid yeast haven't had that, so generally their cell count, as well as their vigorousness, is a little bit higher than dried yeast, and you can count on it to be more of true cell count than what can be in the dried yeast packets, but that's not always true. Sometimes you throw in a dried yeast packet and that sucker will take off right away and ferment harder than any liquid yeast packet. Most of the time we do use dried yeast packets in here, liquid yeast packets in here, but we do build them in the starters. Even if we use dried yeast packets, we generally build them in the starters too. So that's the best way to do it. Take any of your forms, build it into a starter, and then put it into your beer, and you'll have the best consistent results. When you're switching from partial mash to all grain BIB.
I heard someone say, "How do you make a hard seltzer?"
Oh, yeah.
You don't need hops for a hard seltzer, although you can add hops to a hard seltzer. Basically, what we did was we used dextrose, corn sugar water, and we did a series of nutrients during fermentation. And so far, we've liked our Saison yeast the best for that.
Yeah. There's, in all honesty, in doing research for that, there is not too much differences in how to make hard cider. Most people pretty much seem to be in agreement on what you need to do. There are some slight things on using distilled water and building your minerals up from there rather than your hose water, as well as what yeast, and how much nutrients and where to pitch those nutrients. We've seen a couple of different things. We've only done a couple of experiments right now. We can tell you, stagger your nutrients so far, We haven't done that experiment yet, but it worked beautifully in there. You definitely need a butt ton of nutrients. And then, yeah, French Saison was really nice for that.
Someone call that a mandatory beer chug.
He drinks much faster than I do.
It's not my fault.
You can open his throat hole really well. All right. Oh, yeah. Franco, this is actually a good one on there. And I think we kind of hit it just a little bit. Logistics issue of getting liquid yeast to the bottom of Africa. Can totally understand that. For you, man, I mean, if you want to make it the same as liquid, just build up a yeast starter and it's going to be the same. If you can only get dry yeast, use some dry yeast. If you do it right and take care of it, there isn't going to be too much of a difference.
Did you already do the suggestion on a warm fermented Bohemian Pilsner?
No, I think that's way further than where I am right now.
No. I don't know Celsius. Someone tell me what 19 Celsius is in Fahrenheit.
Oh, man. Nope. I thought I was going to be smart on that. Definitely not. Brewing a bag system, a bit crazy for doing this.
Our go-to for warm fermented lagers in general is going to be 3470, the Feinsteffen strain. So that would be my go-to. But again, I don't know what 19 Celsius is. So if that's less than 60 degrees, you can definitely pull off something like the Urquell strain, and that'd probably be my go-to. So if 19 Celsius is anywhere close to 58 degrees, Urquell. If 19 Celsius is like 65, Feinsteffen Lager. 3470 Global Bohemian Lager and Y East.
Doesn't Harvest go up that high too?
Harvest does, but it can throw some fruitiness. So that's like, if you want to do tropical lager, it'd be great.
Harvest, yeah. Harvest is one of, I would say Urquell and Harvest are probably my two favorite lager yeast to use in there.
Oh, yeah. Urquell is like such a beautiful Pilsner. Like,
oh, my God. And, you know, I know some people say it's a flaw, but it gives you just that right amount of sulfur and acetaldehyde in it. With just like,
just enough to make it funky.
I love it. Suicide exempt. You're waiting on your brew in a bag. You would not be crazy to do a stout for your first brew in there. It would be actually a hell of a lot easier than the München Helles.
Or a hazy IPA.
Yeah. Stouts are so easy to do, and they hide so many flaws in there that doing that on a new system to just kind of learn it actually is not a bad idea, because if something goes wrong, you may not taste it behind all that grain. Where the München Helles there, the Munich Helles, you are definitely going to catch any flaws that are apparent in that. So if you do something wrong, it'll be straight up out front. It's a lot more finicky of a beer, too. So...
someone accidentally over-adjusted. So Doug says he accidentally over-adjusted his hazy with 3 pounds of sugar because the refracto was way off. And it still came out like an awesome 9.5% thanks to the magic of Quake. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. Kurt Sark, the Quick Oats, do Quick Oats from the grocery store have a place in brewing a hazy? Yeah. Quick Oats are actually pretty much the exact same thing as flaked oats or rolled oats. And I mean, not pretty much, they are. Yeah. They are the exact same thing.
Gelatinized, flattened oatmeal.
So if you don't have access to flaked oats or rolled oats, or you just need a quick pinch, go to the grocery store and pick up some instant oats. You're good on that. They need to be instant oats, not the steel cut ones. Those are not pre-gelatinized. The instant oats.
Yep.
And then, yeah, definitely in a New England IPA. I love flaked oats in New England IPAs. I prefer it over flaked wheat personally, but I love the flaked oat character rather than flaked wheat.
Arab Half TV says, hey guys, I recently brewed a juicy lager with Citra, Amarillo, and Mosaic. Turned out really good, but a lot of fusels. Do fusels go away as time passes? They can. It kind of depends. But by the time the fusels go away, the hot flavor will probably also go away. So that's kind of that's the battle you're struggling with there.
Yeah. This is a neat one here. I think I'm catching up to you. Rob Baronis, do you recommend a flavor company to go with for hard seltzer flavors? As of yet, no, because we haven't we haven't gotten to flavoring our hard seltzers yet. The few flavoring companies that I've personally found for doing like baking or other stuff like that, Beanella is my favorite. They have some flavor extracts as well as some dried fruit flavors and things like that. Their vanilla is stupid off the marks, amazing.
The best vanilla in the game.
Yeah. That's what we found so far. We are experimenting with some other places bringing them in, so we'll keep you up on that.
Is that Rubes Ramirez? Is that the same one?
Rob Baronis.
Rubes Ramirez needs to make hard seltzer for his brewery. We have found, and what we're going to be going with, we are going to try to make some funky hard seltzers. So we want to make some hard seltzers that have some really quality yeast flavors. So French Saison so far is the one that we've liked the best. We've tried some neutral strains too. They were good, but not great. But yeah, so we've done Saison. We're going to experiment with some Brett strains, probably different quikes, all sorts of stuff. And I think that's, for a brewer, for a beer person, a better way to go.
I'm sorry, I was reading through the comments, catching up.
Someone just asking or talking about having to make hard seltzer for their brewery.
Oh, yeah.
And clearly they're beer people. So I'm like, by the way, it's what we recommend.
Yeah. Talk about making something that you don't want to make that sells really well. Hard seltzer is right there. Man.
Yeah.
If there's literally a beer style that I don't want to make, it's a hard seltzer. Again, we're trying to come up, like we said before, we're trying to come up with ways to make this interesting. And that's, let's try using some Saison yeast in there or something like that to see if we can actually make this more tasty than other people. But, man,
yeah,
that's a drag.
Let's talk about this beer real quick. So the next beer we're drinking is the Hazy IPA. I forget where I put the can.
Over here.
No, yeah, Hazy IPA, so 6.5%, I think it was. 6.8%. Happy Hazy. And for us sitting on this for too long, we did. We had this been in our fridge for maybe 3 months now. This is still really, really delicious. Yeah. So I get a lot of flavors that I would like off of a West Coast, though. I get some flavors that are like pushing forward some pungence, pushing forward a little bit of pine, and I don't get as much juiciness, but that's because we've been sitting on it for 3 months.
Our fault.
Clearly not super hazy, but again, probably a lot of haze in the bottom of that can. But this is still delicious. This is aged better than like any commercial hazy that I've gotten that's this old from the store. So
I
super
will
delicious.
counteract with that just because I've accidentally forgot some of Fremont's hazies. I forgot one of the Dark Herons for a year. And there was no oxidation, and the hop level held up really, really well.
Nice.
But very few and far between. I did not expect that coming out of Fremont. Good job, guys.
Yeah. And especially out of homebrewed hazy.
Yeah.
Like this is still really good.
I mean, from the nose, I kind of do get that West Coastiness going on.
Yeah.
It almost smells like Centennial in there. It's got that big pine grapefruit and a little bit of grapiness.
Yeah.
But
I can see that. Or Columbus. I could see Columbus being in there.
That's really good. That's still really tasty.
It's still a quality IPA, which for as long as we sat on it, like, good job.
Yeah. Way to go. I like it. Did you
peak age of a NEIPA. Speaking of.
Yeah. Great segue right there.
So what is the peak age of a NEIPA? I like to say it's about 3 weeks after brewing it. So package for that should be somewhere between 10 and 16 days after brewing it. Really, really quick turnaround on these things. And then they usually don't hit their stride right after package. There's a little bit of settling down that goes on in kegs or in bottles. And then somewhere between that like late 2 weeks to early 3 week mark is where I find they hit their peak age. That said, a lot of them, or some of them, can age gracefully and be good for a couple weeks after that. And then they start to slowly decline. Others immediately are like no good. And then there's things like this, so it's surprisingly still great 3 months later. So,
yeah, I can, from personal experience on this, most of my IPAs, I give 90 days on that. That's kind of their peak stride, and they start falling off after it. Hazy's normally about 30 days. If you want like a quantitative number, normally about 30 days, it'll start falling off. There's been a few out there that are pretty delicious, like that Dark Heron that I found. I won't say it was as good as it could have been, but it was still pretty darn delicious. Actually, Icicle, the Enchantments that's out right now, Dragon's Tooth, that was packaged up back in June, and it's still tasting pretty darn good. Sabro, Mosaic, and Citra going in there, and the Sabro is really starting to come out and shine. I will say from having it fresh when I was up in Leavenworth, it has lost a lot of the citrus juiciness in the background, but it's still actually really good. So it depends on how good the brewer is, and depending on the hops that are in there too. If you have some of the hops that can last longer, they'll age out a lot more gracefully. But I normally say about 30 days, and then it needs to be gone.
Any tips to shorten a double brew day on an electric system? Enzymes.
Enzymes
will get your mash done in like 15 minutes.
Yeah. Enzymes are awesome, and it's also going to give you some extra benefits in there. Like I mentioned earlier, we're using Visco Buster. We also started using OptiMash, and it's gotten me incredibly higher on my original gravity than expected. It's insane. If we keep using them, we'll probably have to readjust our malt bills to bring it back down.
Which means we're saving money.
Exactly.
All right, so we can leave these two for later. We've got one IPA left. I want to get the IPAs drank so we don't have to keep sitting on them way all past their prime. That's a coconut porter that we're not going to drink today, and that's a wee heavy that we're not going to drink today because those ones will age just fine. But I want to get these IPAs drank so we can do as much justice to them as possible. But so far, I'm super impressed with these.
19 Celsius is 65 or 66 Fahrenheit.
So 66 Fahrenheit, you definitely want to go with the Feinsteffen Lager strain. Feinsteffen Lager strain can ferment at 66 Celsius or 66 Fahrenheit, not 66 Celsius. That would be really high.
Yeah. Milkshake IPAs, when do you add fruit puree to it after the cold crash? If we were adding fruit puree, we're probably going to do it after, in the tail end of that, maybe right before cold crash, just so the yeast can work a little bit on those sugars and not re-ferment while it's cold and sealed off and give us off flavors like DMS. Plus, if you, I would say you want to do it in a sealed container, but while it's warm, so yeast can reabsorb the bad flavors, but you won't off-gas the good flavors.
And then if you need to sweeten to get all the sweetness that you're going to lose from fermentation, you can do that with lactose in the front end. That's why milkshakes work. And there's also some other non-fermentable sugars that you can add to kind of boost that, like monk fruit.
Monk fruit, delicious. All right, thinking about doing a pineapple double hazy with some Voss. That sounds delicious. Yes. White barley wine. Interesting. Good starting time to 3 months will be a good starting time to age a Quake barley wine. At 14.5% though, it's gonna need longer than 3 months.
Yeah, I'd be almost worried about something like that, especially if you're fermenting hot and going fusel. Like there's a lot going on there. And that said, this is uncharted territory for us. We have not done this. So
DB, when you get that done, send us a few bottles and then we'll drink it on live TV.
Then we'll know.
We'll know. And then
the reason we like that people share beers with us, by the way, besides the fact that we get to drink beer, which is awesome. Is that we get to learn their stories. We get to learn what went into those beers and share that information with other people. And so we learn really, really fast when it comes to beer stuff because so many people share their stories with us. And so not only are we doing our own experiments and learning our own things, but we're also getting the experience of everybody else that comes in and shares beer with us.
All right, I'm going to take a second on here. Count Druncula, I don't know if we have talked about this before, but he says don't brew with cereals. Oh, never mind, I didn't read the whole thing. Don't brew with cereals that has lots of iron fortification. I take that back. I was going to say we brew with cereals all the time, and it doesn't taste like iron filings. But read the whole question, and that makes more sense. Yes, if you brew with cereals or other adjuncts like that, they can be awesome. We do 2 beers regularly with cereals, as well as quite a bit of others. Just make sure you do look at their mineral contents and then compensate for that in the total beer.
Does going no sparge and very thin mash affect the flavor at all? Yes.
I just saw that. Yes.
So no sparge and very thin mash, basically you're probably going to lose some efficiency. You also might lose some higher starch building compounds. And that has to do with basically how the how the enzymes that are going to break down your mash work. If they have to swim really, really far to start breaking some stuff down, they're going to take a lot longer to break down starches into simple sugars, basically. So,
yeah, I mean, you kind of think about it in terms, let's say like a cow in a pasture. If it has to walk, a half a mile over to its feeding station to eat something, and then another one's a half mile away, it's going to take a lot longer than if it can just slowly mosey through and munch on everything around it. So, of course, it's going to slow it down. You might lose some efficiency on it. To compensate for that, enzymes will definitely help because you're adding more enzymes in so they can actually get everything, as well as maybe some extended mash periods. Doesn't mean it will compensate fully for it, but will help.
Hubert X says, if I plan to do White Lab's California Ale, what's the Chico strain, for a 1055 2.6 gallon batch, would I really need a starter? I saw that people put it in direct from the pack. 2.5 or 2.6 gallons, 1055 OG, probably don't need a starter. That said, we still always recommend a starter. And the reason isn't just the cell count. The reason is you have your yeast ready to eat the sugars in your beer right off the bat. So what that means is a shorter lag time before you start fermenting, and the quicker your yeast are going to be competitive in your beer. So first of all, they're going to create more neutral flavors, and there's going to be less of a risk of anything else impacting your beer at all. So I always recommend a starter. I will never say don't do a starter. That said, you're probably fine without doing a starter.
Yeah. Frazzled Penguin, you're partly right. Frazzled Penguin says they thought that hard seltzer was carbonated water with vodka or gin. Yeah, it can be. And it can be, even Anthony responded back that it's not in America, but it is. If you are the distillery who makes the hard alcohol, you can 100% make hard cider with
hard seltzer.
Hard seltzer with spirits, with vodka, gin, whiskey, anything like that. Just like all the canned cocktails
Everclear,
that are coming out. If you are a brewery or winery, you cannot, because you can't produce that.
Two different license types. So there's a lot of breweries that are producing naturally fermented hard seltzers, and then there are some distilleries that are producing fortified water, basically, as a hard seltzer.
Yeah.
Two different products. The goal is to get them the same or at least as good tasting equally. Bud Light hard seltzer, obviously, that is brewed with sugar. Truly brewed with sugar. That's Sam Adams.
Yeah.
There's another one. I think White Claw is fortified.
White Claw might be fortified.
But yeah, so there are some that are fortified. They're basically vodka, water, carbonated with flavors. But the vast majority, honestly, a lot that you see out there, a lot of the big ones that you see out there, Corona, obviously, that is brewed seltzer. That means it's fermented as sugar water and then flavored.
Now, I will say this. It might have actually been illegal to make them with spirits or just fortifying the seltzer before, a few months ago. But now that distilleries and places like that are being allowed to make canned cocktails, you're going to see a lot more of those come out.
And that's Frazzle Penguin's actually, he's a Canadian, so he's
yes.
got different laws than us.
Yeah.
But in America, that's
how it works, at least for us. To be DB, this is something that we're going to work on too, making a tart hard seltzer. Talking about seltzers again, I personally believe because there's no sugars in it, you get that fruit flavor and then you're missing everything else. The fruit sugars and the acidity. That if you add acidity to your seltzers, it's going to be way better. At home, I almost always have lemon juice to add into my hard seltzers, and it makes it taste so much better. Here, we're experimenting with some lactic acid, but we are actually going to experiment doing things with the Philly sour yeast, which somebody was so gracious to order for me.
Yeah.
And making them with lactobacillus and other souring bacteria.
Have we ever used Brew One hops in an IPA? We sure have.
Yeah, they're delicious. Oh, man, wow. Okay.
With enzymes, are you losing any malt character? Yes. Mostly bodybuilding character, though, so not necessarily a lot of the grainy flavor character, but you do lose some of the thickness that comes with a
Think about it as if you mashed at 145 instead of 155. At 155, you're going to be building bigger malt or bigger bodybuilding sugars, where at 145, you're going to have thinner beers. If we're going for something like a true English porter or, an ESB, we're not using enzymes in that because that would create it too thin to come out with. Most of the other beers, the body is not something that we're as concerned about. So,
so the one off flavor you have to worry about with enzymes is they can, if you have too many enzymes that you're adding to your beer, they have a meaty flavor. So you can get too much enzyme in there.
Yes, dose properly, and if you're unsure, go lower.
First attempt at a hazy IPA ended up being 9.4%. Does that mean it's a barley wine instead? Nope, it's still just an imperial hazy IPA, and probably won't age like a barley wine would. And a super imperial West Coast would probably be a lot more likely to turn into a barley wine than a super imperial hazy.
Hey, TDB is Jimmy. Sweet.
Oh, nice.
Thanks, buddy. Bring it in and bring more beer in. Like, come on, son. What are you doing? Barley wine is kind of a catch-all for things over a certain percentage of alcohol, but it isn't everything. If you made a high-alcohol hazy IPA, you made a high-alcohol hazy IPA.
Benjamin Harris, I have too many squash in my garden. Is there a way on how would I mash the squash? You would scrape out the meat, you would bake that on a pan, and then you would throw that baked meat of your squash right into the mash.
We've done it before. It's delicious. If you smoke it a little bit too, it's awesome. Just don't go too much. Too much smoke is never good in a beer.
Yeah. Brewing 9 different yeasts at 36/97. Oh, so 97 Fahrenheit.
Thank you.
And one is kicking out hella acetone. Oh, it's not a question. That's just a statement.
Just a statement. Yeah.
We've had some acetone beers before. They're very obtrusive.
Unfortunate, I think is the word I would use.
You need to make a starter for Voss Quake? Not really. No.
You can if you want to, but Quake is one of those things that if you get more character if you underpitch it. Oh man, this thing is jumping around. Oh, okay.
Takes off one.
Doing, Friends from the North. That's on there. Yeah, Kurt, it's really early. I'm just gonna leave you with that. Out
of fab.
User had to use
What's your
base sugar and hops for their seltzers. Yeah, Featherston Autofab. That's actually the same way that it is for us. We can make a butt ton of different things. It just has to have its main sugar content
come from grain,
and that's like 51%.
So corn counts as grain, so we get to use dextrose
and rice. Yeah. Although where we are at in Washington, and I don't remember if this is nationwide or not, we can only make 100% rice-based up to about 8%, and then after 8%, it turns into a winery license.
Yep.
Which is weird, but
laws hopefully are changing soon, because Rona's actually moving our LCB forward. What are your opinion on Imperial yeast vitality? I have a pack of Imperial that's 5 months old. Clearly, I'm making a starter, but not sure if or how much growth I should give it. If it's stored well, Imperial yeast their vitality stays very, very good.
We have, let's see, the oldest lager that we've revived, I think it was about a year old, which lagers love cold, so I would say they're probably more viable. We revived in Ardennes from about 8 months, and then the last ale that I remember was about 6 to 8 months too.
One of the things about Imperial yeast is they store their yeast in distilled water, DI water. And what that does is it keeps it inactive as long as the yeast are below their fermenting threshold. Whereas Y yeast and White Labs store theirs in a growth medium, meaning if they start fermenting, they have something to chew on that's not yeast. But if they're cold, they'll still try to be active in fermenting. So stored cold, Y yeast and White Labs have worse vitality. Stored warm, Imperial has worse vitality. So that's kind of the trade-off.
Yeah. K-berry, yes, 100%. You can use real fruit in your hard seltzer. Just keep in mind, fruits have sugars, so you need to ferment that all the way out. This is one of the hard parts. You have to ferment it all the way out to keep the low-cal, low-sugar content nature of the hard seltzer that so many people enjoy. Also, pectins will be in there, which will make it a little hazier. Some people care about the hazy and clarity of it, so just pectic enzyme and away you go.
Jeff Carlson, 1 mil of 85% phosphoric brought my mash from 5.5 down to 5.4. The next 1 mil only brought it from 5.4 down to 5.36. Does that affect normally on a curve? I can't really speak to the math on that because I haven't had time to actually calculate it, but pH is logarithmic, meaning every 1 pH drop, so from 5 to 4, for example, that means 4 pH is 10 times more acidic than 5.
I'm going to go in there to say that you're probably right as well. Druncula is throwing out that is logarithmic as well. So yeah, and remember, a lot of things in brewing is not directly scalable. And a lot of the numbers that we work with are not necessarily flat line numbers like pH. It's some things that you can kind of forget, like, oh, if I add this much, it should do that, and like, it doesn't quite work that way. So always check your math.
Anthony DiFada, from my experience, as long as it's storage, that's not a question. Roy Hall, I'm building a home brewery. Do we have a video of ours, and what would we change if we do? Wife kicked me out of the kitchen. Nice. That's how you know you've made it, son. Depends on your budget, honestly. Lower budget, the easiest thing is something like an Anvil Foundry, all-in-one system. But if you have a big enough budget, you can go something like you can go with like glycol chilled stuff and everything, and that's gonna be the way to go. We're gonna take 3 or 4 more questions, but we do have to start opening up, so let's get those done. And
yeah, there was one in here I just read. Oh, here we go. Rhetoric. Are there any ill effects from not boiling my wort after mashing? No, actually. Yes and no. This is called a raw beer, and we actually do it a lot. Most of our sours are going to be raw, as well as the pseudo lager we just made with Lutra is raw. You have to compensate for what you're doing. If you're not boiling it, it is going to create different flavors. You're not boiling out any hop break. You're not creating any Maillard in there. And you're not concentrating your sugars down. Those are some big things you have to compensate for. Plus the actual flavor of the grain. You're going to get a way grainier beer than you would if you boiled it, just because of the nature of how that works. But awesome, you can do it 100%. You can even make an IPA with no boil, as we have done before. And I think there is a video. If it's not out, then it will soon be out for that.
Yep. Where are you in Washington? We're in Spokane, Washington. So that's eastern Washington, almost close to Idaho. And someone's saying, studies have shown that underpitching quike actually hurts fermentation and produces less esters. Check out a Escarpment Labs blog. Yes and no. We've played with both. So sometimes we pitch regular pitch rates. Sometimes we underpitch. I think the most I've underpitched is 1 homebrew style 5-gallon packet in a 5-barrel batch.
Yeah, that actually turned out extremely funky. That might have been the funkiest batch that we've had besides our natural inoculations.
Yeah.
Well, I would actually say on this, and we should probably do a little bit more research for it. Well, we have a strain, and I think the flavor profile that comes out, I'm pretty sure that it's Hornadol, but we have a strain of quike that's living in our brew house right now that has fully taken over some of our natural souring batches. And I mean, that's got to be just like thousands of cell counts falling into the beer while this thing is going, and it is funky. I mean, that is the most expressive quake that we have had. Could be the difference of it naturally falling in and building up, or it could be of a low cell count. So something for us to do more research in.
Yeah, but so we've had great experiences with high pitching quake and great experiences with low pitching quake. I know there's a lot of studies that go both ways on that. We tend to read all the studies and take the information with a grain of salt because we do our own experiments. We brew enough batches that we can actually, experiment with all these things. And so when we give information to you guys out there, it's coming from what we've brewed and what we've made. So take it as you will. If you want to brew like us and do the same things that we do, they're totally cool. If you disagree with us, we're also A-okay with that. That's one thing that I think is weird when people get really, really mad when they try to disagree with us. I'm like, that's cool you disagree with us. That's like, whatever.
This is brewing. We all do things different, and it's all right for us.
Exactly.
That's one thing you kind of got to remember on that. Like, what we're doing is works really successfully for us, our system, and our environment.
Yeah.
And it may not work the best for you, but you'll never know until you try it. You know, that's the beauty of this. We can experiment as much as we want, and somebody's going to drink it.
Tim, do the closeout. Tell them to like and
subscribe. Okay. Roy Hall, Allison just commented on that. Roy Hall, we are open for business 7 days a week, 10 to 8 o'clock most of the time. So thanks for watching. Yes, I got to do this one on there. Gifferim says one thing he doesn't disagree with is that bomb stash. And you know what? As much as people make fun of Peter for it, I agree. Not every man can wear a stash, and that's a beautiful stash. All right. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in. All your questions, comments, it's awesome. We appreciate all you guys. We will be back with you next Sunday at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning. One of those. 8:45. That one. We're going to turn this into a podcast, so definitely go listen to us ramble at you again. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Instagram, our TikTok, our Facebook. We have one of those. It's going to be at Genus Brewing, pretty much for all of those. You can subscribe to us individually at Genus Beer Miler, Genus Danger Boots, or Genus Squatch for Logan, if you love the little furry guy. I know I do. He keeps you warm at night. And again, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate y'all. Oh, and last comments. This is an...